Well, Simon, I'm glad you said state responsibilities because this occurs to me to be very much like what we see across the states and territories across this country. You have governments that decide that they're going to intervene, that they're going to raise wages for various public sector groups, but they're not building anything. They don't have anything to show for it, but they do have huge recurrent expenses on the books. How do we get out of what seems to me like a wage debt spiral on the federal side?
It's a big problem. We're seeing it in Victoria and Queensland in particular. The recently elected Labor state government in New South Wales is basically promising to remove all these wage caps, particularly around teachers, for example, with an inability to even cost how much that might actually set the budget back. So there certainly is a growing problem there. And it's also this decoupling of the idea that we should be getting productivity benefits for wage increases. Now, it's difficult, right, to measure productivity in the public sector. There's sort of additional components to it, but it can be done. But unfortunately, we keep seeing the government shying away from those sort of things. You know, in education, it's a good example. My colleagues have done some great work on this about how you could actually drive productivity enhancing reform in education and around wages. But when we just say, well, you know, the government can afford to pay for it, we don't actually have to pay for it in the short term anyway, well, why don't we just boost everyone's wages? It's exactly the wrong way to go about it.
And Simon, just very quickly, let's put your economist hat on and let's take politics out of the equation. If they could do one thing, a real budgetary reform in tomorrow night's budget, what would that be?
Well, so we've been on about this for a really long time. The simplest and most effective in the long term reform that they could do is that they could eliminate bracket creep by indexing the tax brackets. So right now, as we see, inflation's running at 7%. Over time, everyone is paying more and more of their wages in tax thanks to bracket creep. With a stroke of the pen, the Treasurer could eliminate that forever. That'd be a terrific reform. Unfortunately, governments like handing out tax refunds. They like handing out tax cuts, even if they're not real. So we won't see something like that, unfortunately.
No, Simon, and in fact, I suspect that tomorrow night when the budget is handed down, we are going to see an awful lot of wage inflation being exactly how they're planning to balance the budget. Simon Cowan from the Center for Independent Studies, thank you so much for joining me tonight.